we cannot reliably predict which way the wind will be blowing in the next hour.
Objects, which will interact in ways that I predict will be revolutionary for consumer.
You can't predict the future from the past or from anything else.
That didn't predict anything. Yeah, I showed you they were more accurate.
So that the Old Testament prophets predict him. They promise him. The Old Testament.
And this is the astonishing human capacity that starts from the assumption that the best way to predict the future
And you can't predict the future from the past, for example.
It doesn't predict all of brand success, but it is starting to predict a larger percentage of brand positive.
I predict you won't. So that's...
It does not predict exactly what happens in a given experiment. However,
what do I predict? I think it'll become, if I were
about the moment we're at, is you can sort of predict what the next 6 months are going to look like. Do we expect that the presidential...
You can predict it for page views, time spent, whatever.
Is hard to predict, but so
it's pretty hard to predict where it would actually land, but
I think it's hard to predict. The assumptions...
Our ability to predict some of these factors. What is some
proposition? You have to be able to predict that there is some ending.
And what you can see is, and here just I predict, when my...
Or maybe you can't even predict that you're going to need to be eating salad.
One example of a preventative strategy, there's research that has shown that you can predict response to tobacco.
Could not predict the order in which citrus or water were going to be sprayed into their mouths. Felt much.
So can you therefore predict someone's SAT score based on their using kind of categories?
Say, listen, these are a subset of data that would predict the outcome. But then, he did that, and he showed.
So one would have to predict for Donald Trump that he won't be able to do that either.
Happening in trying to predict not only when you introduce a strategy how it will do, but
are going and can predict with a fair degree of accuracy where the negotiation.
For instance, scientists today can predict when the next total solar eclipse.
You can't actually predict what playing style they have. It turns out that
Ideas from nature is that nature doesn't plan, it doesn't predict, and it doesn't try to be perfect. What nature does is it adapts to...
Every now and then you hear that somebody has been able to predict something that happened in the future, and that's probably because...
And on top of things, when they can predict what's happening next, they don't tell time by looking at a watch, but they know after snack.
I talked about being able to predict things mathematically. You can predict...
People to predict who's happier. The person who names more...
And then conduct research and figure out how do we best predict